Hi everyone, I'm Dale Smith, aka Journo Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics. All right, we're here this week with Patricia Trouble, who is the royalty reporter at Maclean's Magazine, and I figured we would talk about the royal visit because the future King of Canada was here for 3 days, and there's a lot of particular themes that were being discussed as part of this tour. Reconciliation was a really big one. Why don't I get Patricia to walk us through what happened?
Well, in a way, this tour is a reaction. It isn't. It is, and it isn't a reaction to a tour that happened about a month and a half ago in the Caribbean, and that was when Prince William and Kate, Duchess of Cambridge, were down there. They were visiting Belize, Jamaica, and the Bahamas, and parts of it were a great tour, but parts of it kind of completely fell off the rails, and it very quickly developed a narrative of being kind of an out of touch, neo-colonial, vaguely imperialistic tour, and one that avoided the big touchstone issues, especially in the Caribbean, of the issues around slavery, around apologies and reparations, and the issue of republicanism. A lot of these countries are hitting big landmark anniversaries, 60 years past of independence and stuff like that, and are now talking about not having the Queen as their head of state, republicanism. And they didn't handle it well, I'm going to say. They kind of back end loaded a lot of the issues. They didn't. William gave some very good speeches, but at the very end of the tour, and so all the criticisms and everything built up through the entire tour. This tour was the complete opposite. And a lot of it is the way tours in Canada are built. But a lot of it is because it was done by Charles and Camilla. And they are incredibly seasoned, experienced royals. They've got an incredibly seasoned, experienced staff, and they know how to put on a tour. And so what you saw right off the top was that they knew one of the issues that was going to come up was going to be Crown Indigenous relations.
Yeah.
And he dealt with it in his very first speech. Mary Simon, the Governor General, dealt with it in her very first speech. And so that really kind of set the tone. It was a very much listen and learn. That was the mantra that we kept hearing.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very low-key tour. No big set pieces, so no grand state banquets, no, opening a seaway or doing anything really dramatic. This was 3 days of doing smaller community events that would normally go on a big foreign tour, but events that you would see with royals moving around Britain itself. And that is kind of a recognition of the fact that they come to Canada a lot.
Yeah.
I did the math, and Charles comes on average every 2.5 years. And he's been doing that for a half century. So you don't have to have the big grand set pieces. You can have those small little sustainability financing roundtables. Might not get as huge crowds, although the crowds were quite good in Ottawa, in St. John's, and in Yellowknife. But not as fussy and not as mussy, shall I say? No muss, no fuss. That was what they wanted.
And I think that's interesting too, because I think one of the hallmarks of the Canadian monarchy, as opposed to the UK monarchy, is we're a lot more workmanlike, and we're a lot more kind of down to business in terms of how those relationships kind of operate. And this goes back to when Princess Louise was in Canada, because her husband was the Governor General, and there was kind of decisions made that we're going to kind of do away with some of the fussiness, and I think that kind of carries forward today.
Exactly. I mean, you've seen royals come here, over the generations. I mean, when we talk about the Duke of Connaught, who was Governor General during the First World War, his daughter, Princess Patricia, who is Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, who is beloved in her time. I mean, she was on the $1 bill, and she was so beloved. And what was she doing? She was doing all the sports. So she was out skating and skiing and, and hiking all over the place. And yes, this has always been a much more informal country, a much more informal realm country. And that's why I'm going to be honest. Will we ever see a tiara again on a royal in Canada? I think maybe when we have a new king and a new queen and they're on their first royal trip, maybe for a state opening of parliament, which we haven't had for a very long time. But other than that, I think it's very much informal. And I'm going to be honest, I think they prefer it. Big set pieces they're exhausting, and it's so easy for anything to go wrong. And I think they kind of like this the informality. I think they like the differences that Canada presents to them, because they can engage in parts of their charities, parts of their organizations that the rest of the world really doesn't know about. I mean, you had the RCMP musical ride. You're thinking, why are they there taking part in the RCMP musical ride? He's the honorary commissioner of the RCMP. They were up in the Arctic. He was actually at a center that he himself had opened decades before. And they were going through all the changes that has happened since that time. Canadian Rangers. He's involved in the Canadian Rangers.
They made him an honorary ranger this time.
Yeah. And he's involved in a lot of these organizations. And his charities, the Princess Charities Canada, the Princess Trust Canada, does a lot of work with Indigenous groups, and not only here, but also in Britain. So, and these are the sorts of things that kind of come out in a tour that you kind of go, I didn't know that happened, or that they were doing this. And one of the things was talking about Indigenous languages. And so Indigenous people, especially in the Arctic, have been to Wales, and they actually went to visit Charles in his home in Wales. And what they were doing is that the Princess Charity had sponsored them because, the Welsh government has been able to successfully save what was an endangered language, the Welsh language. And so they wanted to learn sort of the tricks of the trade. And so he set it up.
And that's really fascinating, and kind of an indication about how much involvement they do have in Canada, that they're not completely removed like some of the stereotypes or some of the narratives might seem to indicate.
Exactly. And one of the things that I do, because I love data, is that I crunch all the data coming out of the court circular, which they track the official engagements of the working royals. So, the Queen, Charles and Camilla, William and Kate, there's 12 of them right now. And what you see sprinkled through all those engagements is Canada, 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 often by Zoom now, often when governors general, lieutenant governors are going through, they stop in and they want to be told what's happening. They want to be briefed and informed on what's happening. And, we've heard this time and again. You've heard the stories, I've heard the stories. Canadian politicians go over, they have lunch or tea with the Queen, and they're stunned because she knows everything, right down to, the gossip about what premier's on his way out and what, who might replace him. She knows it all. And Charles, of course, has built that up over decades upon decades as Prince of Wales.
Yeah. One of the things I'm curious about is how Camilla is adapting to Canada. One of the things I think is that we don't capitalize on enough is that Camilla has Canadian roots. One of her ancestors was a pre-Confederation prime minister. And so I'm curious how they're building that up with her profile here.
Well, she's been slowly, so she married Charles in 2005. So we're coming up to almost 20 years. And she's been slowly kind of ramping up because, of course, most of her life, she wasn't a royal. And it is a different life. Yes, you don't have to worry about who's going to cook your meal and, the laundry, but you're always in the public eye, and it's a hard life. And she's been slowly building things up. And what was noticeable is we saw here, whenever they had events, they always would say, the Princess Charities and Camilla's charities as well. So we had also the Queen's Own Rifles of Canada, which is her big regiment here in Canada. Whenever she comes to Canada, she meets with the Queen's Own. And I was on the last tour in 2017. I was actually the pool reporter for an event where she was meeting with her regiment, and she knew all of them. And she actually was looking at one man's uniform and said, "Oh, you have a promotion since I last talked to you." And she not only recognized what the symbols on the uniform were, but she recognized him and knew he had a promotion. And that just shows the kind of the in-depth experience. And the other thing they do is they also touch on causes that she likes. So
Yeah.
she is literacy and reading. So we had that in Ottawa with a school, and especially up north. She met in a transitional housing. She has taken on the issue, and it's a tough issue, and it's spousal abuse. And she's given a lot of talks and has raised the profile of a topic a lot of people don't like talking about, but really raised it, and has figured out ways to support women that probably some people didn't even think about. Is one of the things that she had the idea for in Britain, and nobody really thought about it, was that after you go to the hospital and you have to have a sexual assault, kit, after you gone through that examination, first thing everyone says is they said they want to take a shower, but nobody had the toiletries. So she worked with all the companies like L'Oreal and everyone, and got kits together. And it's one of those small little things that, being a royal, you can shine such a bright spotlight on issues, and the fact that she takes on increasingly tough issues is quite something. And I'm going to say the British media, who follow them around, the royal correspondents, they adore her. They really, really like her. She's very, very professional. And she's always making sure that they have the shot they need for the photographers. And she's always got a good sense of humor. And I'm going to be honest, at the end of the day, and those were long days in Canada, my humor was not so good.
Yeah, I've definitely heard the tales of her sense of humor. And I think that's something that I think we should probably learn to appreciate a little more. As we get to know her better, the more that she comes to Canada. And am I correct in what I heard, that the story time that she did with that school was partially in French as well?
I wasn't there for that.
Okay.
So what happens often on royal tours, and I was in the Ottawa section, is that because they had like 11 engagements in a day, they break the media up and they make the media choose. You have to choose bus A or bus B. And basically you do half of the events or the other half of the events. I think she actually did half of it. Yes, half of it in French, or part of it in French. Charles is fluently bilingual, and he speaks apparently superb French. And of course the Queen does. The Queen speaks impeccable French, to the point that sometimes politicians don't even realize they're speaking French until all of a sudden, because she drops very quickly, immediately into it.
Yeah.
That they don't even realize that they're flicking back between English and French. But I think so. And she actually just started something which is interesting, which I'm hoping will come to Canada, which is a reading room. So it's a kind of an online reading club. And she's got like amazing authors, because of course she can attract them because she is the future queen.
She's got a profile.
Yep.
I guess for my last question is, let's just talk about the Indigenous angle a little more, because that was such a focus on this particular trip. I know Charles has had a long-standing relationship with a lot of Indigenous communities in Canada. Mm-hmm. How is that kind of shaping up in the current context? Because it has shifted a lot in the last couple of years.
It has shifted. And I think the fact that he has so many years of talking about the environment, talking about climate change, talking about preserving traditional cultures, talking about, and not just cultures, but languages, talking about their artistry and all that sort of stuff, that has certainly helped. And that has built his bona fides, because he's been talking about that well before you or I were really talking about a lot of these issues. And I think the fact that over the last few tours, I would say in the last 10 years, the Indigenous portion of the trips are becoming far more important. I mean, as it should be. And the fact that we weren't talking about this, 10, 20 years ago, it's just shameful on our country. Yeah. And he dealt with it right off the top. So, in his opening speech, he dealt with it. And what I found quite impressive was how the Governor General dealt with it. And here's what she said on her speech. I'm going to put my glasses on just to read it. And this
Yeah.
is what she said. She said, I encourage you, meaning Prince Charles, to learn the truth of our history, the good and bad. In this way, we will promote healing, understanding, and respect. And in this way, we can also promote reconciliation, which is not one act or project, and it does not have an end date. It is a lifelong commitment. And I think that's the sort of thing his job is a lifetime job.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we saw on the tour. Even people, so the head of the Assembly First Nations met with Charles at Rideau Hall. There was a reception there for the Platinum Jubilee. And she was very blunt that she would like an apology from the Queen because of what happened in the residential schools. She would like an apology because the treaties that are, of course, signed with the Crown have not been fulfilled by the government. And she was very, and she said, Charles was very gracious, listened intently, asked a lot of questions. Now, of course, as you and I know, Charles and the Queen can do nothing without the government.
Yeah.
Yes, without the government saying that they can do it. You need that permission from the government, and the government has already apologized. And of course, an apology from the Queen was not in the 97 directives from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But he took it on head on. I mean, there was no ducking the issue. She made it clear she wanted to talk to him, and he made it clear he wanted to listen. And they made sure that the media knew that this was happening. And I think in that way, you're listening, you're paying attention to their issues, and you're listening to their point of view. And that's what the monarchy is supposed to be doing.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks so much for doing this, and we'll talk soon.
We will, because you know what? It's turning out to be a big year for the Royals, I think. So.
All right. Thanks again.
Bye, Jeff.
And that's everything for this week. Join us again next week for some more Canadian politics. I'm Dale Smith. That's at journo_Dale on Twitter. And don't forget to like the video, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Thanks, everyone.